In this world, is the destiny of mankind controlled by some transcendental entity or law? Is it like the hand of God hovering above?
In Berserk, we've seen the idea of God take many shapes and forms depending on where people were geographically and even what they call a deity. For example, a village next to the ocean where the inhabitants look weird. There they pray to a thing that they call the sea god. In Midland, the main area where Berserk takes place, we are introduced gradually to the Holy See, a church that has a close connection to the ruling classes. We see the organization structure with a pontiff at its head, the inquisitors, whose job it is to clear out heretics and punish them as it seems fit. There are even leaders of armies that are employed to go and defeat the evil forces. The organization takes inspiration from the Spanish Inquisition. It's all in service to protect the world from what they believe to be an evil force, the Falcon of Darkness. This is really the only thing we have heard that the Holy See believes in, and the only prophecy we have heard them goes, "When the sun dies 5 times, a red lake will appear to the west of a city with a name both old and new. It is proof that the 5th angel will alight. The angel is the Falcon of Darkness, the master of the sinful black sheep, the king of the blind white sheep, the one who shall call upon the world an age of darkness." It appears that the eclipse wasn't an event that only affected Guts, Casca, and the few that witnessed it. Instead, there seems to be long-lasting ramifications from it. When Farnese and Ozan came across the lake and see all the blood in the water, their first thought was to the prophecy, because a red lake will appear. They most likely told the Holy See, which placed them in a higher state of fear and panic. 2 years later, the people of Midland are waiting for a savior to come, a Falcon of White. There in the shadows, deep in the caves, hidden away, there's a cult that seems to be waiting for the return of the Black Falcon. Instead of a white bird fixed to poles, it's a black bird. They dance around the flames while others perform acts and activities that bring the Lady in the Flames. Now, this group is here to do one thing and one thing only, and that is to defile God and almost make a mockery of them, with members joining by saying an oath and drinking a soup made of people. They do this in the shadow of holy places. Both groups are the same. If they pray to a white or black bird, they're praying to nothing but a person that has tried to create a world he sees fit. And he even grants powers to both the Holy Inquisitor and the Great Goat. It seems that the battle between good and evil, the Holy See versus this cult, is nothing more than the manipulation of an apostle. This monster is an apostle. A person at one point sacrificed someone that they loved. Here in the world of Berserk, this wild assortment, from the ones that live like an elf to an evil baron, is because they are given one commandment: do what thou wilt. And they do exactly what they want. Who is this higher being that gave them the commandment and the power? For that we must go back in time and to another plane of life, to the astral world. Thousands of years ago, there was pain, anger, and hatred in the physical world. Those negative emotions spread through the world and spiraled up into a plane of existence, the astral world. Those emotions swirled and created a vortex. At the center of this vortex is an entity made of flesh, and it calls itself the idea of evil. What we know about the idea of evil comes from one chapter, a chapter that Miura published but felt it gave away too much. Even though we have seen so little of him, we get a lot from that chapter. The idea of evil controls destiny. It takes the will and the essence of humankind and weaves every man's destiny to shape what he wants. He even influences people's consciousness and their lineages to a point that best fits his idea of what is good. The purpose of the idea of evil is that the world is full of pain and sorrow, and his goal is to give people a reason for their lives, and that their deaths had purpose. To see how powerful the idea of evil can be is by how they describe his will. They call it like a river. However, he must have individuals that are responsible for having a more hands-on approach on creating fear and doubt in the world. In chapter 362, we see the earliest version of the God Hand members, each having their own responsibilities and powers to change the world. So think of them like the four horsemen of the apocalypse, each with their own purpose. A god of disease, a god of desire, a god of war, the voice of God, the leader of God. There are two main theories to explain the God Hand's origin. The first is that the God Hand were created at the same time when Void was created, while the second theory thinks that every 216 years they add another one to the ranks of the God Hand members. The year 216 is because the Crimson Bailet, which creates the God Hand members, comes about every 216 years. It's not until chapter 53 we hear Judo talk about 5 angels coming down to erase the city from the face of the earth without a trace in the span of a night. Assuming that there's little truth in that statement, it's interesting to hear that 5 angels visited the sage that night because they weren't created that night. The 5 angels visited the sage, that the ruins being the bedrock of the Midland capital. There, in the deepest parts of the pit, past the statues, there we see the mound of corpses, each having a brand on them, a brand of sacrifice. The history of Void is heavily connected to 2 chapters that paints the destruction of Beserk and the creation of Void. Like Femto, we see his life before he became a God Hand member by the literal scars he has. 1,000 years ago, a sage was imprisoned by the Supreme King Beserk. Beserk was also known as the Demon King, the King of Galloping Death, Skull King, because he donned a dreadful helmet shaped after a skull. There, he forced his people through hard labor to build a large city. We know thanks to chapter 362 that Void was this sage. The Skull Knight was the Skull King, Beserk. Because history is like a spiral, similar but not the same. The scars of Void trace back to his physical body before he became a God Hand member. Assuming Miura used history for this next part, we know he does look at history to inspire his books. The sewn eyes, the cut off nose, the peeled mouth are all signs of treason. Maybe at one point Beserk, after bringing peace to the land, was betrayed by a friend, his sage, and was placed in a tower, there tortured for the crimes of treason. However, probably the biggest clue to this is not from the manga, but from the official Statue of Void. With his cloak flown back, you see that all that remains are his arms and spine. In history, commonly when people were put to death for treason, they were drawn and quartered, which is when a horse pulls you in opposite directions. As the sage was in his final moments, the lowest moments of his life, he cried out to the heavens, and the angels heard his plea. Yes, angels to some, demons to others. There, in the ruin of the city, as King Beserk is holding the person he loved in his arms, he looks up to see the sage, his friend, transformed into someone else. Void. Slan is probably the most iconic one. I see why. Now, I do not want to go down the rabbit hole of theories that aren't supported in the manga, because I see Slan being an amalgamation of many historical figures, and I think there is little truth in all of them. So whether you see the appearance of Slan using her sexuality similar to Cleopatra, yes, I agree. If you think of Elizabeth Bathory, who bathed in the blood of virgins because she wanted to stay youthful, then yes, I can see it. Instead, I want to look to her and see if we can glean something more. In chapter 262 of Berserk, we see the physical manifestation of Slan with guts. This moment is very different compared to other manifestations. We see Slan using the guts of trolls to not just move, but to hurt and do a lot of damage to guts. There, Skull Knight says the greatest comeback in the entire series. The whore princess of the uterine sea. That phrase is interesting for two things. The first is he calls her a whore princess. We could see a few things even from this wording. This could be relating to her previous life when she was a princess. It could even relate to her role as a God Hand member. We see her manipulating the masses of people with the sins of the flesh. She is the goddess of the flame that the cult leader screams out while everyone is having a great time in close proximity to one another. But that's all the connections. These different groups with different ideologies are creating wars that hurt the overall world. The second thing is this uterine sea. Possibly, it could be relating to a body of water, but most likely it's referring to her creating all the monsters, her uterine being very massive. But the creation of these monsters is there to strike a greater fear in both massive cities and villages. Imagine for a second that you live in the world of Berserk. You can't go into the forest or nature, not because you're going to get lost, but there is a monster that is going to try to kill you. As you sleep, you must be worried of a night raid by trolls. This is where her power lies, by having the ability to create monsters. And why the previous God Hand member is an almost one-for-one inspiration of Artemis, goddess of fertility. She is not a goddess of fertility to people. She is the goddess of fertility to monsters. Looking at this weird person, you notice two things. One, its mouth. Two, its corpse-like body. What we know from COVID is that the mouth transmits disease, so all we need to do to defeat this guy is slap a KN95 mask and boom, God Hand defeated. What he represents is disease. Disease has long been connected to Conrad. When he manifests in the physical world, he comes from a mound of rats. Rats have an interesting history. They have long been known for the Black Plague that killed 1/3 of the human population. It was actually caused by the fleas, if you did not know. This shows he uses sickness to spread fear and pain to all places. There are a few times we have seen disease in the land, and it's heavily implied that Conrad has some power over it. Every group needs a mouthpiece for them, and Ubik does that. The first time seeing the God Hand in the Black Swordsman arc, Ubik is suggesting to the Sluglord to sacrifice his daughter. When the deals need to be made, he does the talking. The second time we see his true power, a voice of evil reason, pushing Griffith to become Femto. The other ability we see him have is the ability to get into people's mind and show them what they want, or even visions of things that could be. Ubik fills the role of this guy, this wide-mouthed previous God Hand member. Some people have speculated him as a lion because of his face. I have even heard him being compared to a Dilophosaurus, that dinosaur that killed the Dennis Nedry guy, the one who wanted to get a stick. Instead, in ancient Greece, actors would wear these masks as they perform to audiences. Ubik might not wear a mask, but what he does is weave a tale that helps him and the God Hand out. For how little we have seen Conrad and Ubek, it is hard to say for certainty that these are the only things that they have power over. This does give us a good foundation to build other theories on. We just need to wait for other chapters to be released to see their backstories. Looking back to the prophecy, we have seen many things have already come true. The revelations say that when the sun dies 5 times, mostly referring to the 5 God Hand members, a red lake will appear to the west of the city with a name both old and new. The red lake mostly referring to the eclipse, and the city, both new and old, probably is referring to Geisrik's former capital, because at the bedrock of the Midland capital is Geisrik's kingdom. It is proof that the 5th angel will alight. Again, Godhead members have been compared to both angels and demons, so the 5th angel would probably be referring to Femto becoming the 5th angel. The angel is the falcon of darkness. This is an interesting line because I see that it's portraying as the person who becomes the angel is not the angel of light, but instead the angel of darkness, the master of the sinful black sheep. We know that Femto becomes the general or even the leader of the apostles, an army he has formed that are made up of apostles, the king of the blind white sheep. It is interesting that when Femto emerges, he becomes the savior of this world, and the people have gotten behind him. The one who shall call upon the world an age of darkness. Many people are starting to get visions of a white falcon. Almost like when Griffith returns, they see him as this savior they need. We even see how Zod, one of the strongest apostles, loses a horn after Griffith reveals himself to Zod. I'm sorry, buddy, you don't have a horn for the entire rest of the series, it looks like. This prophecy is very one-sided. It only tells of a threat coming. Nowhere does it mention a savior, and I think that is the genius of Griffith. Let the people of Midland be afraid of a foreign monster, but not realizing that a monster and an army of monsters are protecting them. I don't blame the people of Midland. Imagine, for a second, if a person arrived and has the forces to defeat an invading army. He personally defeated a monster that was so big that its head went into the clouds. Now, a city that was once King Geisrik's has appeared and is a haven from monsters. There you have food, a job, and peace. And at the very top of this castle, this person even has the power to show you loved ones that have passed away, allowing you to say goodbye. You would think he is a god, and the idea of a church and kingdom built around him wouldn't sound too far off. We know the truth. Griffith isn't a savior. He is a God Hand member. Could this setup be a plan for something else? Could Griffith be doing this to use the threat of war for a crusade against something threatening the idea of evil and the God Hand? Could have Griffith orchestrated everything to fit his own interests? Well, we don't know. There are some clues, but that's another video. We're just needing to wait for more chapters. But one thing is for certain, this crazy world isn't going to be ending soon. In chapter 372, we are seeing him preparing the troops for war. The last major thing he has done, he opened up a portal to the astral world, and now his fellow Godhead members can come in and affect the world with their own physical bodies. Hopefully this helps you have a better understanding of the God Hand and what they're doing. There are more mysteries we're waiting answers for, like if there were an old set of Godhead members, then would the Skull Knight know what happened to them? Can the Godhead members be killed? And how is that possible? If there is a God Hand of evil, could there be a God Hand of good? Did Miura decide to remove the idea of evil chapter not because it gave away too much, but did he decide the ending was going to be something else? Well, we have to wait and see what Studio Gaga has in store for us. Regardless, if this has piqued your interest in Berserk, you gotta read the manga. There's a deluxe edition where the pages are bigger and it's hardbound. The links will be in the description. I'm also going to throw in a few other links down below that are other ways for you to consume Berserk. Don't forget to do all the YouTube stuff, the liking, the subscribing. Thank you for watching this video, and remember to be good and do good. Bye-bye.